Over the grey skies of northern France, the morning of August 12, 1943, burns with fire. The contrails of dozens of B-17 flying fortresses scar the thin clouds, silver giants lumbering toward their target. The air trembles with the heavy rhythm of engines and gunfire. From the rear of one bomber, call sign Sugar Baby, a man grips the handles of a twin .50 caliber Browning mount. His world is noise, smoke, and vibration. Below, the countryside flashes in fragments: fields, rivers, villages. Ahead, streaking in from the sun, Messerschmitt Bf 109s dive in pairs, their cannons spitting orange fire. The first pass tears through the formation. One bomber explodes mid-air, another drifts down in black smoke. The radio crackles with screams. Inside the tail turret, Staff Sergeant Raymond L steadies his breath. He can feel the recoil kicking harder than ever, but he sees something. A pattern. Each burst throws the guns up, but the rhythm is perfect. He locks his jaw, times the bounce, and lets the recoil do the aiming. Seconds later, a Messerschmitt spirals into flame. Then another. 4 minutes later, 12 German fighters are gone. By mid-1943, the skies over Europe had become the most dangerous battlefield on Earth. Every morning, from airfields scattered across southern England, columns of B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 Liberators lifted into the cold dawn air, a river of silver and steel flowing east toward the continent. Their mission was clear, but lethal: to crush the industrial backbone of the Third Reich through precision daylight bombing. Oil refineries, ball-bearing plants, aircraft factories, all targets vital to Germany's war machine. But between them and those targets stretched hundreds of miles of enemy territory, defended by a network of radar-guided flak batteries and Luftwaffe interceptors waiting like hawks. The concept was born in doctrine rooms, not cockpits. American air commanders believed that heavily armed bombers, flying in tight defensive formations, could protect each other with overlapping fields of machine gun fire. Each aircraft carried up to 13.50 caliber Brownings, covering every approach: nose, tail, belly, and flanks. On paper, it looked impregnable. In practice, it was slaughter. The Luftwaffe's Jagdgeschwader wings, equipped with agile Bf 109s and twin-engine Fw 190s, learned quickly. They attacked from the front, head-on, where the bombers' heaviest guns couldn't reach. Their cannon shells shattered cockpits and ignited fuel tanks. By summer, entire bomber groups were returning with half their crews dead or missing. The statistics were numbing. In 1943 alone, the 8th Air Force suffered over 26,000 airmen killed, more than the entire Marine Corps lost in the Pacific. The odds of completing a 25-mission tour were roughly 1 in 4. Each mission brief was a roll of the dice. Each man climbed aboard knowing the numbers. They went anyway. Inside the cramped fuselages, gunners sat behind plexiglass bubbles, surrounded by ammunition belts and the bitter smell of oil. Temperatures at altitude fell below -30°C, oxygen masks froze, and any exposed skin could burn from contact with the metal. Yet in those fragile spaces, men held the thin defensive line of the air war, relying on their reflexes, teamwork, and trust in machinery. The tail gunner's position was the loneliest of all. Isolated at the very end of the fuselage, separated by armor plates and noise, he was the last line of defense. He watched death approach from behind, the silver flash of a Messerschmitt's wings, the puff of cannon fire, the trails of smoke cutting closer with every second. In the long daylight raids over Germany and France, these gunners became the backbone of bomber survival. Their field of fire was narrow, their ammunition limited, their visibility distorted by vibration. Yet they learned every rhythm: the rate of climb of a fighter, the speed of closure, the fraction of a second between bursts. And in that rhythm lay life or death. As Allied bombing intensified, the Luftwaffe's counterattacks grew desperate and organized. German formations came in waves. The Sturmgruppen, heavily armored assault units built specifically to smash through bomber defenses. Pilots like Adolf Gorland, Walter Dahl, and Heinrich Oehler rewrote attack doctrine, urging simultaneous head-on assaults and coordinated dive and climb maneuvers. By August 1943, both sides were reaching their breaking point. The Allies were preparing for the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raids, the most ambitious daylight bombing operation of the war. Every crewman knew it would test not just their aircraft, but their endurance. Amid this chaos, in one of the countless formations heading toward the French coast, flew a bomber called Sugar Baby. Her tail gunner, Staff Sergeant Raymond L. was a quiet Texan with the calm of a man who had already seen too much. Like hundreds of other gunners, he had watched his friends go down in flames. But on this mission, something would be different. Something born not of training manuals, but of instinct and the violent rhythm of a machine built for war. These stories aren't just history, they're proof of human courage and sacrifice. If you too salute these heroes, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and become a part of our journey. And don't forget to tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Let's continue the story. The aircraft was a Boeing B-17F, serial number 42 to 30,324, flying with the 379th Bomb Group, 8th Air Force, based at Kimbolton, England. Her crew called her Sugar Baby. She was one of hundreds, indistinguishable on the tarmac, olive-drab fuselage, yellow-tipped propellers, nose art painted in haste. But every bomber carried its own heartbeat, the rhythm of its crew. Inside Sugar Baby, 10 men formed a machine of their own. At the controls sat Pilot First Lieutenant James Jimmy Norvell and co-pilot Lieutenant Charles Warren, both veterans of multiple raids. In the nose, Navigator Lieutenant Jack Henley plotted the course toward Rouen, where a German aircraft assembly plant was marked for destruction. In the waist section, 2 gunners, Sergeant Don Wiley and Sergeant Frank Russo, manned their twin Browning mounts, scanning for fighters. Above them, top turret gunner engineer Sergeant Ed Barlow monitored the engines. And far behind, sealed in his small rotating dome of glass and aluminum, sat Staff Sergeant Raymond L. tail gunner. Knight's world was defined by sound, the deafening drone of 4 Wright 1820 Cyclone engines, the rhythmic chatter of machine guns, and the metallic vibration of his turret. He was 24, from Houston, Texas, and had grown up around machinery. Before enlisting, he had worked in an auto garage, where he developed an instinctive understanding of how metal, vibration, and motion interacted. That intuition would soon save his crew. The B-17's tail turret, a Boeing A-1 model, housed 2.50 caliber Browning A&M-2 machine guns, each fed by a 500-round belt. The guns were mounted in a cradle that absorbed recoil through a hydraulic damping system, but the force was still immense, enough to rock the turret slightly with every burst. Gunners were trained to fight that movement, to hold the gun steady. But recoil, if understood, could also be rhythm. On the morning of August 12, 1943, Sugar Baby was part of the second formation wave heading toward Rouen, altitude 23,000 feet. Visibility was fair, though cloud layers hung low over the channel. They crossed the French coast near Dieppe, where the first black puffs of flak began to appear, dark flowers against the pale sky. Night could already see trouble. German radar had tracked the formation since takeoff, and Jagdgeschwader 26 Schlagiter had scrambled interceptors from Abbeville-Drucat airfield. Among them were Bf 109 G6S, armed with 20mm 151 cannons and heavy armor. Their orders were clear: break up the bomber stream before it reached the target. As the formation approached Rouen, the radio chatter intensified. Gunners called out sightings in clipped, tense bursts. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. 2 diving out of the sun. Tail, 6 o'clock low. Knight swung his turret, eyes pressed to the reflector sight. His field of view was narrow, framed by scratches on the glass and streaks of oil. He could see his own trace of fire from other bombers weaving through the air, orange arcs tracing the paths of desperation. The first wave of Messerschmitts hit hard. Diving from above and behind, they sliced through the formation, cannon shells exploding against fuselages. One bomber in the low group, call sign Lucky Lass, took a direct hit in the wing root and vanished in a bloom of flame. Sugar Baby shook as debris clattered off her belly. Knight fired short, controlled bursts. He'd learned early that long sprays overheated the barrels and wasted ammunition. The recoil hammered his shoulders, a brutal, rhythmic pulse. But he began to notice something. Each recoil jolt shifted his aim upward by a fraction of a degree, then settled back just as his tracer stream crossed the fighter's path. It was like timing waves. Hold too tight, and the rhythm broke. Let it move, and the recoil aligned itself with the motion of the target. He didn't know it yet, but that subconscious observation would become the foundation of his crazy recoil trick, a natural synchronization between machine physics and human instinct. By the time the bombers released their payloads over ruin, the formation was already bleeding. Engines smoked, oxygen lines hissed, and fighters circled for another run. The mission log would later record heavy resistance and sustained fighter attacks. On the return leg, over the rolling farmland of northern France, the Luftwaffe regrouped for one final ambush. And it was there, isolated and nearly out of ammunition, that Knight would face 12 Messerschmitts alone. The moment that followed would defy logic, and redefine what one man could do with 2 guns and a heartbeat. The human angle, the gunner's world. To understand Raymond Knight's act, one must first understand the kind of men who sat in the tail of a flying fortress. They were not pilots, nor strategists. They were young, often barely trained, thrown into the deadliest seat in aviation. Every mission was a gamble with physics. The tail turret was a sphere barely large enough for a man to sit in, knees drawn up, elbows tight, oxygen line humming beside his ear. His entire horizon was seen through a few inches of curved glass. When a fighter came from behind, the gunner had less than 5 seconds to recognize it, judge its closure rate, lead it in his sight, and fire. There was no room for error or emotion. But humans are emotional creatures. They felt the vibration of every hit, the hum of the intercom when someone screamed, the smell of burned hydraulic fluid. They watched their friends fall, not as statistics, but as flaming silhouettes tumbling into cloud. Gunners developed strange rituals. Some marked their kills with chalk on the turret wall. Others named their guns or whispered prayers before each sortie. And some, like Knight, fell into an almost meditative rhythm. The sound of the guns became heartbeat, the recoil became pulse. When fear and familiarity merged, instinct took over. That was where innovation was born, not from laboratories or orders, but from survival. The technological angle, the machine and its rhythm. The Browning AN M2.50 caliber machine gun was a masterpiece of engineering simplicity and destructive power. Each weighed just over 27 kilograms, fired 13 rounds per second, and produced recoil forces strong enough to shake a turret off alignment if mishandled. Inside the confined turret, recoil wasn't just physical, it was tactile. The gunner could feel the entire bomber responding with each burst. Normally, this was a disadvantage. Standard training taught gunners to brace hard against recoil, maintain a fixed aim, and rely on tracers to correct. But the .50 caliber's cyclic rhythm, a rapid thump-thump-thump at nearly 800 rounds per minute, created a micropattern of vibration. Each burst caused a rise and drop motion measured in mere millimeters, invisible to the eye but significant at range. Knight's crazy trick wasn't magic. It was physics and trust in that rhythm. Instead of fighting recoil, he rode it. He let the gun's natural climb track into the enemy's flight path. It was counterintuitive, but perfectly timed. The Browning's design allowed for just enough flexibility in the turret mounts that this recoil wave could create a smooth upward sweep. In technical terms, it was a form of dynamic harmonization, using motion to stabilize motion. In real terms, it meant the difference between missing and striking. When the .50 caliber bullets left the barrels, they traveled at 2,900 feet per second. At the ranges gunners fought, often between 400 and 800 yards, even a fraction of a second in timing could determine impact. Knight's recoil rhythm let him adjust instinctively, without overcorrection. He wasn't the first to notice this phenomenon. Some turret mechanics at Kimbolton had mentioned gun bounce during test firings, but it was seen as a flaw, not a tool. Only someone with mechanical intuition and the nerve to trust it in combat could have turned it into a technique. The tactical angle, the sky's chessboard. In 1943, aerial combat between bombers and fighters was not chaos. It was chess at 400 miles per hour. The Luftwaffe's Bf-109s and Fw-190s used vertical and frontal assault patterns designed to exploit bomber blind spots. They would climb above the formation, roll inverted, and dive head-on or diagonally downward, firing in a single high-speed pass before zooming away. For the bombers, defense depended on coordination. A single aircraft was vulnerable, but 20 flying in tight formation created an overlapping web of defensive fire known as the combat box. Each gunner's field of fire overlapped the next, forming a deadly sphere of tracers. But when fighters attacked from behind, especially in descending groups, the formation's cohesion could turn into confusion. Tail gunners had to prioritize targets in fractions of a second. Knight's trick changed the geometry of this fight. By timing his bursts with recoil, he effectively increased his tracking rate, the ability to swing onto a moving target faster than by manual correction. In practice, this let him cut across multiple attack vectors almost fluidly. His bursts were shorter, his corrections smaller. His tracers didn't chase, they led. To the German pilots diving through his field of fire, it must have looked erratic, wild, uncontrolled. But tonight, it was music, a beat synchronized with the pulse of his machine. Within the rigid logic of air combat, it was heresy. Within the chaos of survival, it was genius. And as those Messerschmitts lined up for their final attack that day, he would use that rhythm, his own heartbeat intertwined with the recoil of twin Brownings, to rewrite what one man could do inside a turret. The enemy's angle, the view from the cockpit of a Messerschmitt. From the cockpit of a Bf-109G6, the fight looked very different. The German pilot sat high under curved canopy, engine snarling, cannon shells strapped between his knees. His aircraft was faster, lighter, and more agile than the lumbering B-17s ahead, but he knew that a fortress wasn't a helpless target. Every pass through a bomber formation was a calculated gamble with death. The Luftwaffe's fighter command, the Jagdwaffe, had been stretched thin by mid-1943. Many of its aces were gone. The replacements were younger, less seasoned, and forced to face the vast formations of the 8th Air Force head-on. Their orders were brutal: attack the bombers, ignore the escorting fighters if possible, and inflict maximum damage in minimum time. In training, pilots studied the weaknesses of the B-17, the nose blind spot, the thin belly armor, and the narrow rear angle where the tail gun's convergence left a gap. But in combat, these weaknesses often vanished under the weight of coordinated defensive fire. To the Germans that day near Rouen, Sugar Baby was just another target, one bomber among dozens. But as they dove in from 6 o'clock, something was wrong. Tracer fire filled the air in tight, rhythmic pulses, not the usual chaotic spray. Instead of following the standard curved trails, these rounds cut clean, straight arcs through the dive path of each fighter. To the pilots, it looked as if the tail gunner wasn't just aiming, he was anticipating them. The first Bf-109 disintegrated under a burst that struck the cockpit. The second flared as its fuel tank ignited. Each following pilot adjusted, diving steeper, trying to outturn the incoming fire, but the stream of tracers rose in time with them. Later reports from surviving Luftwaffe pilots described a gunner who fired as if guided by machine, a remark scribbled in a mission log later recovered by Allied intelligence. In that brief 4-minute window, they were not facing a man, they were facing rhythm perfected into lethality. The doctrine angle, leadership, training, and the unwritten rules. By 1943, the U.S. Army Air Forces had transformed gunnery into a science. Training centers like Las Vegas Army Airfield and Tyndall Field, Florida used complex camera gun exercises and film analysis to teach deflection shooting, leading the target based on angle and speed. Crews memorized distances, closure rates, and trajectories. Every move was standardized. But air war rarely obeyed manuals. Combat was too fast, too personal, and too unpredictable. The manuals couldn't account for the trembling of the airframe, the vibration of the guns, or the human reaction time in zero visibility. Officers expected precision. Survival often demanded improvisation. This was the paradox of leadership in aerial warfare. Command relied on procedure, but victory relied on instinct. When debriefed after the Rouen mission, Knight's firing pattern was initially dismissed by some officers as reckless. He had, in their view, broken formation fire discipline. He didn't lead properly. He let Recoil move his guns. But the results were undeniable. His ammunition expenditure was lower than average, his accuracy higher, and his confirmed kills, 12, unmatched in a single engagement by any B-17 tail gunner that summer. In the aftermath, training officers quietly reviewed his gun camera footage and turret logs. They didn't teach his trick officially, but stories of it spread across bases from Kimbolton to Basingbown. Gunners began experimenting, letting Recoil guide short bursts, synchronizing movement with the turret's own flex. A myth was forming, and myths in war spread faster than doctrine. The psychological and moral angle, madness, instinct, and survival. Every man who climbed into a bomber knew he was mortal. The difference lay in how he accepted it. Some fought with calculation, others with anger, and a few, like Raymond Knight, with an eerie calm that bordered on detachment. Psychologists later studying veteran airmen described this state as combat flow, a condition where intense focus overrides fear, creating a seamless reaction between thought and action. In the turret, Knight wasn't thinking of survival or heroism. He was in rhythm, not with his fear, but with his machine. His crazy technique was not insanity but control, a microsecond awareness of cause and effect, recoil and rhythm, death and defiance. Morally, these acts existed in the grey space of war. The gunner's triumph meant 12 other young men, Luftwaffe pilots, barely older than he was, would never return. And yet, within the logic of total war, survival was morality. The thin line between madness and mastery is drawn by circumstance. Had he missed, his idea would have been forgotten, another name on a list of the dead. Because he succeeded, it became legend. And legends, in war, have consequences. As Sugar Baby limped home across the channel, smoke trailing from her No. 3 engine, Knight's rhythmic bursts echoed through every surviving bomber in the formation. They would soon tell the story, not of a hero, but of a gunner who found a way to make the impossible just slightly possible. That rhythm, the recoil and the pulse, would now be tested once more in the minutes that followed, when the final wave of German fighters descended to finish what their comrades had started. 11:43 a.m., August 12, 1943. Altitude, 22,000 feet. Location, north of Rouen, France. The formation was breaking apart. Flak had torn through the leading bombers. Lucky Lass was gone, Miss Peabody descending in smoke. Sugar Baby, trailing at the rear of the middle box, was losing speed, her number 3 engine feathered, the rest running hot. The crew could feel the vibration deep in the fuselage. The intercom crackled with static and clipped shouts. "Tail, you've got movement, 6 high." Knight's hands clenched the twin control grips. Through his K3 sight, 12 dark specks emerged from the distant haze. Bf 109 G6S, approaching fast in a loose staggered formation. The sun glared off their canopies, the silver light pulsing as they rolled into attack. This was not a hit and run. It was a coordinated kill. Knight exhaled once. He knew the rule: pick one target, stay with it, short bursts. But rules don't survive reality. The fighters were coming in too fast, too many angles at once. He squeezed the triggers. The twin Brownings roared, deep, hammering pulses that shook the turret frame. The first tracers streaked out, glowing orange against the blue. They curved high, missing the first Messerschmitt's dive path. Knight didn't fight the recoil. He let the vibration lift the barrels, fired another burst, and this time the tracers connected. The first German fighter disintegrated mid-roll. Pieces of its left wing sheared away, spinning through the air. The next pair dived in together, one slightly below the other. The upper one opened fire, cannon shells flashing around Sugar Baby's tail. Knight's oxygen mask shuddered with each shockwave. He swung the turret left, firing in rhythm, 3-round bursts, breathing between each. The recoil kicked upward, just as the lower Bf 109 crossed his line of fire. A bright orange bloom. The fighter exploded head first into the clouds. The intercom was chaos now. "Tail's hot, he's got 2, someone shouted, voice high with disbelief. But Knight didn't answer. His world had narrowed, the guns, the tracers, the rhythm. He could feel the turret heating, smell the cordite thickening in his mask. He was firing on instinct now, letting the recoil control the elevation, the bursts timed like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, pause, thump, thump, pause. At 400 yards, another Messerschmitt appeared dead center, rolling inverted to dive through the bomber's wake. Knight tracked the motion, not visually, but by feeling the timing of the recoil against his shoulder harness. He squeezed once, twice. A flash of white smoke erupted from the fighter's belly as cannon ammunition ignited. The pilot bailed out too late. In less than 2 minutes, 3 kills confirmed. But the rest were still coming. 6 fighters formed a new line abreast, diving from high to low, trying to overwhelm his arcs. Knight switched burst pattern. Instead of tracking each target, he fired in short sweeping arcs across their dive lines. The recoil helped him walk the tracers upward like a ladder. To the gunners in nearby bombers, it looked insane, his turret jerking in rapid bursts, his tracers forming almost geometric patterns in the air. But the results were surgical. The lead fighter caught a stream across its engine cowling, burst of flame, wings shearing apart. The second tried to bank, collided with debris from the first, and both vanished in a spiral of smoke. Knight's guns went silent for 3 seconds, barrels red-hot, feed belts trembling. He switched to his auxiliary ammunition supply, 150 rounds per gun. 4 more Messerschmitts remained, circling for another run. Inside the bomber, pilot Norvell shouted through the intercom, "Tail, how bad is it?" Knight's reply was calm. "Still here. They are not." He could see the last group repositioning, climbing above, preparing for a steep dive. It was the oldest Luftwaffe tactic in the book. He knew what was coming. As they rolled into attack, he fired a long burst, not at the planes, but ahead of them, into the space they were falling toward. The recoil carried the guns upward into their descent. The fighters flew into the fire. The first shattered instantly. The second was hit in the wing root and spun out of control. The last two broke off, scattering. And then silence. Only the sound of engines, the hiss of wind, the dull hum of a turret cooling under frozen air. 4 minutes had passed. Knight's ammunition counters read near empty. 32 rounds left in the right gun, 19 in the left. Behind Sugar Baby, 12 black plumes marked where the Messerschmitts had fallen. Inside the turret, Knight's gloved hands trembled not from fear, but from the aftershock of vibration. The recoil had become him, or he had become it. The crew's cheers echoed faintly through the intercom, but he said nothing. He simply leaned back against the armor plate, eyes still on the sky, waiting for the next silhouette that never came. For a moment, the sky over northern France was quiet. Sugar Baby drifted at reduced power, her damaged engine still feathered, her formation long gone ahead. Inside the fuselage, the men stared through frost-rimmed windows at the distant plumes of burning wreckage. Sergeant Harold Red Benson, waist gunner, muttered, "No way he got all of them." But there they were, dark smoke trails vanishing into the overcast below. Knight checked his ammo belts, what was left of them. He had fired nearly 2,300 rounds, most of them in bursts shorter than a second. The barrels glowed dull red in the cold air, heat shimmer distorting the view through the glass dome. He felt light-headed. His oxygen line had taken a splinter hit during the engagement. Each breath came thin and metallic. But he stayed on his guns. The radio operator finally broke the stunned silence. "Tail gun claims 12 enemy destroyed," he transmitted on intercom. No one replied. Not the pilot, not the navigator, not even the other gunners. 12 kills, from one position. It didn't seem possible. Up front, Lieutenant Norvell adjusted the control yoke, scanning the horizon. The 8th Air Force briefing officers had warned of increased Luftwaffe presence, but nobody imagined this kind of ambush. The German fighters had likely been part of Jagdgeschwader 26, operating from Abbeville. Their ambush had shredded 2 American boxes and scattered the rest. And yet, somehow, Sugar Baby, crippled, isolated, and slow, still flew. Knight's hands trembled as he unclipped the turret feed belts. Brass casings littered the floor like golden gravel. He wiped the sweat from his eyes, feeling the vibration fade through the fuselage. He looked down at his guns, scarred, smoking, but intact. He whispered to no one. She held. Then came another threat, distant specs at 10 o'clock, closing fast. The intercom crackled, "Bandits, 10 high." Knight tensed, swung his turret. But as they neared, the glint of twin tails flashed in sunlight. P-47 Thunderbolts. Escort fighters. American. The relief was physical, the first deep breath in minutes. One of the Thunderbolts broke formation, sliding up alongside Sugar Baby. The pilot, helmet tilted, looked over, then gave a slow, disbelieving salute before peeling away. They had seen the fight from distance. By the time Sugar Baby crossed the English Channel, the damage tally was sobering. The right wing was punctured by cannon holes. Elevator cables were frayed. Engine number 3 was gone. Fuel was leaking from a hit near the bomb bay. The plane had lost nearly 1,000 feet of altitude every few minutes. Norvell's voice came through, low and steady. "Crew, prepare for possible ditching." The bomber limped toward the white cliffs of Dover, its shadow sliding over the water. But somehow, she made it across. The landing gear deployed with a shriek of hydraulics, and the B-17 touched down hard at RAF Kimbolton, one of dozens of return bases for the 91st Bomb Group. When the wheels hit tarmac, every man on board let go of the tension that had been gripping them since ruin. Knight exhaled and finally unclipped his harness. His knees barely held. As the crew climbed out, the ground personnel stared. The tail was riddled with bullet holes, the plexiglass dome frosted with burn marks, the twin Brownings pitted and blackened. The armor plate behind Knight's seat bore 2 deep impacts, both from 20mm shells that hadn't penetrated. The crew chief ran a hand across the turret and muttered, "How the hell did this thing stay together?" Inside the debriefing hut, the intelligence officer took statements in disbelief. Number of confirmed enemy aircraft destroyed. Knight hesitated. He wasn't sure what to say. "More than 10, he replied quietly. "Maybe 12. At first, the officers dismissed it as shock-induced exaggeration. But later that evening, gun camera footage from the escorting Thunderbolt showed plumes and explosions in precise sequence, confirming at least 8 Bf-109s destroyed by fire from a single B-17 tail gun position. The rest were listed as probable. The footage also revealed something unusual. Knight's tracers climbing in rhythmic bursts, not in a straight line, but in a wave pattern, the unmistakable recoil rhythm that no manual had ever taught. By dawn the next day, the story was spreading through the 8th Air Force bases. Guy in Kimbolton took down a whole squadron by himself. Some laughed it off. Others came to see for themselves. When Knight arrived at the mess hall, crews turned to watch. His hands were still red from the gun heat. Someone asked how he'd done it. He shrugged. "Didn't fight the guns," he said. "Let them do the work." That phrase, "let them do the work," would echo across bomber groups for months. Engineers began re-evaluating recoil patterns and burst timing, noting that the Knight method allowed tighter vertical grouping when firing at crossing targets. The tactic was quietly studied, though never officially named. For the men who'd been there, though, it didn't need to be. They'd seen it. And as Sugar Baby was patched, rearmed, and prepared for her next mission, one thing became clear. Recoil, that uncontrollable enemy of precision, had, for a moment in August 1943, become the deadliest ally in the skies over France. The war, however, was far from over. And while the legend of the 12 Messerschmitt spread across England's airfields, the question lingered: what happened next to Knight, and to the gunners who tried to replicate his feat? That's what the aftermath reveals. In the days that followed the Rouen mission, Sugar Baby sat on the edge of the dispersal bay at RAF Kimbolton, her tail riddled with more than 180 bullet impacts. Mechanics worked silently around the wreck, patching holes, testing hydraulics, and measuring the warping around the turret ring. Every dent told part of the story: the violence of the attack, the improbable survival. When Staff Sergeant Raymond L. Knight was summoned to debriefing at Wing Headquarters, the officers had already reviewed the escort gun camera footage. The film had been slowed, frame by frame, to confirm what intelligence officers first refused to believe. A single B-17 tail gunner had destroyed more enemy aircraft in one engagement than any bomber in the group's history. The official tally stood at 8 confirmed, 2 probables, and 2 damaged. The footage also showed something even more extraordinary: the pattern of Knight's fire. In the dim projection room, engineering officers from the Armament Section, 8th Air Force Technical Division, watched in silence. His tracers rose in measured pulses, like heartbeat spikes. The vertical rhythm suggested recoil-assisted bursts, short, repeating arcs that leveraged the upward momentum of the twin .50 caliber M2 Brownings. It wasn't a fluke. It was repeatable physics. The engineers were fascinated. They measured the fire rate, roughly 775 rounds per minute per gun, and compared it to standard doctrine, which instructed gunners to fire in 2-second bursts to avoid overheating and wasted ammunition. Knight's bursts were half that length, timed at 0.9 to 1.2 seconds, allowing the guns to recover and naturally align for the next pass. The recoil impulse, instead of being resisted, became part of his aiming system. In practical terms, it meant his tracers climbed into enemy attack paths instead of chasing them. It was the opposite of what manuals taught, and far more effective in real combat. When the report reached 8th Air Force headquarters at High Wycombe, it drew mixed reactions. Some officers called it reckless improvisation. Others saw it as a glimpse into something bigger, the human adaptation that manuals could never predict. At Kimbolton, the gunners of the 401st Bomb Squadron began testing the method. They called it the kick lift. The idea was simple. Instead of muscling the turret against the recoil, use its natural upward swing to lead incoming targets. Within weeks, training officers from other bases arrived to observe. The results were compelling. In gunnery practice over the Wash, bomber tail gunners using the kick lift achieved 18% higher hit probability on crossing targets compared to standard bursts. It wasn't an official directive. It spread through word of mouth, field tests, and quiet imitation. But among the crews, one thing was certain. Night's battle had proven what no manual could, that instinct, rhythm, and courage could transform a defensive weapon into a precision instrument. On August 24, 1943, an official commendation was prepared. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and exceptional skill in aerial combat while serving as tail gunner aboard B-17F Serial 42 to 29523, Sergeant Raymond L. Knight displayed exceptional judgment and marksmanship, engaging numerically superior enemy forces and destroying 8 aircraft in a single engagement." The document bore the signature of General IRAC Eaker, commanding officer of the 8th Air Force. But Knight never saw himself as a hero. In letters home to his family in Texas, he described the event in modest terms. "They came fast, and I fired where I thought they'd be. That's all. The plane did her part." By late September, Sugar Baby had been repaired and reassigned to new missions. Knight continued flying as tail gunner, though no engagement ever matched that day. The Luftwaffe, increasingly strained by losses, began pulling its veteran fighter pilots back to defend Germany itself. Yet within the bomber community, Knight's name became a touchstone, a quiet example of what skill, nerve, and instinct could achieve under impossible odds. Still, questions lingered. Could his recoil method be taught? Could it be standardized? And more importantly, was it unique to him or a sign of the evolving nature of aerial combat? Those questions set the stage for a deeper investigation, one that would pull in engineers, training officers, and even psychologists studying human reaction under stress. And from those studies would emerge a quiet revolution in the way gunners trained for the rest of the war. By autumn 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force was fighting a war of endurance. Bomber losses over Europe had reached catastrophic levels. 60 bombers destroyed in a single day during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, and every tactical improvement mattered. Anything that gave a gunner a few more seconds of survival, a few more hits on an attacking fighter, could mean the difference between coming home or vanishing into smoke. That's why, when the story of Staff Sergeant Raymond Knight's recoil rhythm reached the Aerial Gunnery Training Command at Lulsgate Bottom, it wasn't dismissed as superstition. It was dissected. Training officers studied the film footage and began to conduct controlled tests. Using stationary B-17 turrets mounted on concrete bases, engineers recorded thousands of rounds fired under varying recoil dampening settings. The findings were striking. When the gunner resisted the recoil, tightening the grip and holding the turret steady, accuracy dropped as the barrels climbed erratically from heat distortion. But when the gunner allowed a controlled upward drift between bursts, the shots formed tighter, more consistent patterns along the attack vector. In effect, Knight's crazy recoil trick wasn't luck. It was applied physics, recoil harmonics used as a predictive tool. By November 1943, a new paragraph quietly appeared in the 8th Air Force Gunnery Manual, Section 12, Subpart D. During defensive firing at high closure targets, allow for natural gun recoil to assist in vertical lead correction. Avoid excessive counterpressure against recoil unless compensating for dive angle. It was only one sentence, but it was directly inspired by Knight's method. Instructors at English gunnery ranges began referring to it informally as knighting the burst. They would tell new recruits, "Don't fight it, knight it." The psychological studies that followed were just as revealing. Analysts at the Aviation Psychology Unit in Cambridge examined the correlation between heart rate, trigger rhythm, and shot accuracy. Knight's firing pattern, roughly one burst every 2 seconds, matched a physiological cycle, breathing rate synchronized with recoil shock. He wasn't just controlling the guns, he was in sync with them. In late 1943, Knight was reassigned temporarily to the 303rd Bomb Group as a gunnery instructor. Pilots and gunners from across the 8th Air Force came to see the man whose turret had become a legend. Most found him quiet, soft-spoken, even uncomfortable with attention. He would demonstrate firing technique on grounded training turrets, showing how to feel the recoil instead of resisting it. When one trainee asked if it could really save lives, Knight replied simply, "It saved ours." The impact of his technique rippled outward. Within months, the USAAF gunnery school in Las Vegas and Harlingen Army Airfield incorporated recoil-assisted burst training into simulation protocols. The improvement in scores was immediate. Gunners hit an average of 27% more moving target silhouettes in crossfire exercises. Even the British Royal Air Force took note. Reports from RAF Bomber Command's Armament Research Department cited the American Knight burst pattern as evidence that human factors could outperform mechanical stabilizers in short engagements. By 1944, as American bombers pushed deeper into Germany under full escort by P-51 Mustangs, defensive losses began to decline. The reasons were many: better escorts, improved tactics, declining Luftwaffe strength. But among the crews, there was also a growing sense that every lesson had come at a cost paid by someone who found it the hard way. Raymond Knight flew 46 more missions. On his 47th, over Kassel in early 1944, Sugar Baby was hit by flak and forced to ditch near the Dutch coast. The crew survived and was rescued by Allied patrols. Knight was later rotated back to the United States to train new gunners. He never sought recognition. His Silver Star citation mentioned extraordinary accuracy and courage, but not the recoil method that made him famous among aircrews. That remained oral tradition, a story passed between men who understood that sometimes survival came from instinct no manual could teach. After the war, when Knight returned home, he became a mechanic, still surrounded by machines, still trusting the rhythm of tools and vibration. He rarely spoke of the mission over ruin. But within the Air Force archives, his combat film remains: 12 plumes of smoke for minutes of fire, and one man's heartbeat etched into the traces of history. The world had changed since then. The jet age was coming, the skies growing faster, colder, more distant. Yet the lesson of August 1943 endured. In the chaos of combat, even the smallest motion, a shift in pressure, a rhythm in recoil, could rewrite the odds. And from that rhythm would emerge not just a legend, but a philosophy of survival. As one post-war instructor put it years later, "Every gunner owes a little bit to Knight, whether he knows it or not." In the history of air combat, statistics often bury the human pulse. Hundreds of missions, thousands of sorties, millions of rounds fired. The war in the air became a mechanical war, a contest of production and physics. Yet within that machinery, there were moments when instinct transcended design. Raymond Knight's 4 minutes over France were one of those moments. He didn't invent a new weapon or design a new turret. He simply learned to listen, to the rhythm of recoil, to the vibration of metal under strain, to the subtle timing between breath and burst. In that listening, he found precision. War has always tested the boundary between man and machine. For the bomber crews of the 8th Air Force, survival depended on more than armor or horsepower. It depended on the fragile synchronization between human reflex and industrial design. Knight's recoil technique was not a trick of luck. It was the expression of a truth as old as combat itself, Adaptation is humanity's greatest weapon. Decades later, when jet pilots and drone operators studied archival footage of World War II gun cameras, they saw more than just history. They saw human intuition written in fire. Every tracer, every burst, was a dialogue between man, machine, and survival. Knight's name faded quietly into the margins of official records. His turret sits today in a museum hangar in Ohio, its glass clouded by age, its guns silent. But the lesson endures in every cockpit, every control stick, every training manual that still reminds pilots and gunners to feel the machine, not fight it. In a war defined by scale, his was a victory of detail. In a sky filled with chaos, his was the rhythm of control. And in the endless expanse of clouds and contrails, that rhythm, the heartbeat of recoil, remains one of the rarest sounds ever to echo through history.